substrate, one of the most heavily debated topics when it comes to leopard geckos. In this video, I'm going to go through some substrate options that you can use for your leopard gecko and list both their pros and cons. Let's start with these substrates that are almost foolproof. Kitchen roll, tissue or newspaper. Pros: they're less likely to be ingested, they're quick and easy to take out and replace, they're pretty clean and they're really cheap. Cons: they don't always absorb smell, so you can certainly tell when your gecko has gone to the loo. They have to be replaced often. They don't really look natural, and feeder insects tend to hide underneath them. The next substrate is Lino. So this is a substrate I may be trying in the future. It's advised that you don't use lino that's self-adhesive. For example, if you peel the back off and it's sticky, don't use it, as it can be heated by the heat mat and release toxic fumes, which isn't great for you or your gecko. I'd also advise not getting glossy lino. Now this is obviously up to you, but some geckos find it hard to walk on really glossy, slippy surfaces, but you can also get lino with a matte or textured finish. Also, you need to make sure that it can withstand underfloor heating. Pros: it's really easy to clean, it's pretty much impossible to ingest, feeder insects can't get underneath it, it's reusable and can come in many different colours and patterns, so you can really customise the tank. Cons: some geckos find it hard to walk on lino alone, but this obviously varies from gecko to gecko. It isn't always as easy to buy compared to other substrates, and you may need to look around online or in DIY stores, and can sometimes be quite expensive. Reptile carpet. This is a very popular substrate for leopard geckos. Its pros: like the previous substrates, it's less likely to be ingested than loose substrate. You can get it in different colours, so you can make the tank look quite natural. It's not too expensive, it's reusable, it can be easily vacuumed, and it retains heat. Cons: geckos have been known to lose teeth and claws from getting them trapped in the carpet, and I also remember someone being concerned because their gecko wasn't eating, and I believe it turned out that one of the fibres were actually stuck to the teeth on both the upper and lower jaw and basically wired it shut. I've also heard that after giving it a wash, it can take forever to dry out. So in this case, I suggest buying two carpets. So the old one can go out for a wash whilst you put the new one in. And by the next time you clean them out, you take the new one out, wash that and put the old one in, if you get what I mean. Also, I've heard calcium powder can be a pain to remove once it's spilt on the carpet. If the carpet isn't stuck down, feeder insects tend to go underneath it, and it can build up bacteria after a long time. Next, the substrate I use, Eco-Earth, also known as cocoa brick or cocoa fibre. I've personally used this for nearly 9 years, and the breeder I got my first geckos from used this for all of her geckos, and so far I have not experienced one Eco-Earth related illness with my leopard geckos. I've spoken about the substrate a lot in the past, so I'll keep this brief. Pros: you don't have to clean out the entire tank so often, it absorbs most smells, it's great for digging, especially if you have a gecko that needs to lay an egg. Food like crickets can't hide underneath it. It's really cheap, it retains heat, it has a built-in cleanup crew, which you could see as a pro or con because these things break down stuff in the Eco-Earth, which is great, but at the same time they sort of get everywhere the Eco-Earth goes, so that's a bit of a pain. If ingested, your gecko will poop this out. Once I was worried Gizmo had a parasite, so I went to get a stool sample. She didn't have a parasite, she just had an egg inside of her. I got a stool sample for a test, I broke it in half, wearing gloves of course, and inside were some neatly packed stringy pieces of the Eco-Earth. So this is a positive because it shows if they do eat it, it still comes out, and it comes out in a normal poop, so it doesn't obstruct the stomach or the intestine as it comes out. Cons: drying out takes forever. When you first make this brick up, it can literally take weeks to dry out. When you first put it in the tank, it can cause too much humidity, so I'd recommend drilling holes in the top of the vivarium. This allows the water to evaporate out a lot quicker. If you have a tank with a wire mesh lid, you probably won't have this problem. It smells quite earthy. I find that you kind of get used to this though. Smaller feeder insects like mealworms and dubia roaches can burrow in it, so either use a dish for them or feed them one at a time to your gecko. If added in really wet and then pooped on and the poop isn't cleaned out, it can grow a bit of fluffy mould, which is easy to remove, but just try to dry out the Eco-Earth as much as possible before putting it in with your gecko. Now for some substrates I'm not 100% sure about yet, either because I've heard mixed reviews or simply they haven't been used long enough with leopard geckos, so I can't tell you all their pros and cons. First, excavator clay. Now some people will say it's perfect and you can use it with a heat mat, and yet some people will say you can't use it with a heat mat. I've also heard stories where leopard geckos have walked through their water dish, stepped on the clay has become wet and stuck to their foot, then dried out and cracked the skin. So right now I'm really not 100% sure about this one. It looks really cool, it's a really nice concept, but at the moment I can't say if it's really good or really bad. Same can be said with the Exoterra sand mat. Now I did reach out to Exoterra over 2 months ago, but they never got back to me. Once again, I've heard mixed reviews. Some say it's great and has a nice texture and easy to clean, whilst others say that pieces fall off, which can be a danger to your leopard gecko as the pieces are small enough to be ingested, but big enough to do damage. And finally, synthetic grass. Now apparently it's cheap and easy to clean, and you only have to buy a replacement about every 3 years. I've noticed this is becoming more and more popular, however, as I said at the start, it's still quite new, so I can't say 100% how good or bad it is. So they were the main substrates. Now for some added extras. Slate. Now I use slate along with EcoEarth, and I found that the cheapest way to get slate is either go to a tile shop and see if they have any broken slate tiles that they were going to throw out, or you could look for slate products like placemats and coasters that are made out of 100% slate, and sometimes they actually work out quite cheap. Make sure there are no sharp edges and that the slate is nice and big so your gecko cannot eat it. Slate is pretty easy to wash and is usually alright with retaining heat, although I found that the heat from my heat mat couldn't actually fully transfer through the slate, so I ended up putting it on top of the slate and putting some EcoEarth on top of that. Also, I find that slate gets marked very easily. Rocks. So you can use rocks in your tank as long as they're far too big to be ingested. You can usually find these in aquatic shops, and make sure there are no particularly sharp edges on the rocks. Driftwood. You can use driftwood. Once again, it's best bought in an aquatic shop or a reptile shop, and usually it's pretty cheap. If you're going to use driftwood for a climbing frame, don't make it too high. Leopard geckos can climb, but they're not great with falling, especially babies. Also, try not to get the driftwood that's a bit like bark. It has little holes in it. I had a hide made out of that once, and crickets used to hide in it all the time, and it was such a pain. Now onto substrates you must not use. Calci sand, number one worst thing you can use, and I know I get a lot of heat from people who use it when I say this, and they will always bring up like one person who's had their gecko on it for years. But here's the thing, right? I get messages every day from people who have followed the advice of shops and used sand, and I've seen the damage calci sand can do. And frankly, even if a handful of geckos have been fine on it, the death toll greatly outweighs the survivors. It's basically like someone saying, hey, take these pills. Most people have taken them and they've died, but we've got 1 or 2 survivors. If you want to take that risk with your pets, that's your business, but it's kind of ridiculous to me. And I particularly hate pet shops and even specific reptile shops sell this stuff, but when you think about it, it's great for business. I mean, if you made a one-off payment buying something like Lino or reptile carpet, they wouldn't be getting your business so much. But if you're buying bags of sand every few weeks or months, they've got a regular income. Now fortunately, some shops out there are saying do not use calci sand, and that's awesome, but sadly there are still shops out there where money comes way before animals' lives, and that really sucks. Next substrate never to use, wood chippings. These are highly dangerous as they can splinter and pierce the gullet of your geckos, especially when it lunges for food, and when the gullet is pierced, the gecko can no longer breathe properly and subsequently dies. Next, small pebbles, rock shingles, gravel and crushed walnut shells. Do not use these. These can be easily ingested but can't be digested, and this will lead to impaction. And finally, cat litter. I know, it sounds crazy, who would use cat litter, but apparently some people have thought about it. Please do not use it, it's toxic to your gecko and will also probably cause impaction. So I hope I haven't complicated things too much. If you're still really confused what to do, start with something foolproof like lino, kitchen roll, tissue, and then gradually introduce different safe substrates. And don't be afraid to mix things up a bit. Maybe some lino, a few large rocks, a bit of EcoEarth. As long as it's safe, I'm sure your gecko can benefit from variety. Also, if you're using things like reptile carpet or lino and the poop is ruining it, try putting some tissue where your gecko keeps pooping. Replace it every day or 2. This should keep the gecko's environment a lot healthier and much easier to clean in the future. I'd like to thank everyone who sent in their photos and videos for this particular video. I hope this has helped and thank you very much for watching.